Operation Bolero was the World War II code name given to the United States military troop build-up in the United Kingdom in preparation for D-Day. The movement of US Army personnel and cargo between the various ports and destinations in the interior was largely the task of the railway companies, and specifically in the south of England, Southern Railways, who also owned Southampton docks. From the 1st of September 1939, they were under wartime controls. Because of the emergency, all freight cars or goods wagons were pooled, traffic was regulated on priority basis, and passenger movements were curtailed. When American troops first began to debark, the British railways were experiencing three serious problems. First, the critical shortage of manpower arising from the diversion of railway employees to wartime assignments. Two, a sharp reduction in railway equipment because of overseas requirements. And three, a limited capacity to move tanks, other armoured vehicles and bulky items, attributable in part to small cars and in part to clearance restrictions such as those imposed by tunnels. Thanks to the meticulous scheduling of trains, newly arrived troops were able to march directly from shipside to railway cars for the journey inland. The shortage of rolling stock and the competing demands of the civilian economy made close coordination necessary in order to effect the prompt movement of troops. The serious shortage of steam locomotives that developed in Great Britain during 1942 had disturbing implications for the Bolero program. To meet the grave need of additional motive power, plans were made for the procurement in the United States of 400 locomotives comparable to the British austerity class engines. Simply designed so as to permit rapid production, these locomotives were to be used first on the British railways and later by the US Army on the continent. 15 switching locomotives also were required for moving freight cars at the US Army depots in the United Kingdom. The theatre requisition for these 415 locomotives, together with the usual spare parts, accessories and tools, was forwarded in mid-August 1942. Early in 1943, General Lee put pressure on Washington to speed up the delivery of American-built locomotives to the United Kingdom. The need was urgent. So far, excellent weather had forestalled serious difficulty on the British railways, but between 1,000 and 1,500 trains had been cancelled per week. By the 28th of May 1943, a total of 184 US Army 280 locomotives had been received, of which about 100 already were being operated in the British main lines. A definite understanding with the British concerning the employment of the Bolero locomotives was not obtained until mid-May 1943. Though regarded as US Army property, this equipment was to be placed in a joint stockpile under American and British control. As the locomotives arrived, they were sent to a civilian railway shop for final assembly and adjustment before assignment to the British Railways. The British Railway Executive Committee had general supervision of the Bolero locomotives, but thereafter Chief of Transportation kept detailed records of their utilisation, operating condition and location, so as to be able to recall them at short notice if they should be needed for military purposes. As D-Day approached, General Ross increased his pressure on the British for proper maintenance of the Bolero locomotives, but because of the critical labour shortage, his efforts were not very productive. Beginning early in 1944, the Americans' 280 locomotives were progressively recalled by the US Army to be prepared for service on the continent. The return was on such short notice that the British had no time for overhauling and reconditioning, which had to be accomplished by the Americans. The 280s were a great aid to the British railways in handling wartime traffic and represented the major American contribution to the relief of the overburdened transportation facilities of the United Kingdom. Other equipment was also loaned to the British Railways, including 50 060 type steam locomotives for use in the coal mine and at British ports, 700 flat cars for moving oversized loads, 500 tank cars for carrying petroleum products, and 42 refrigerator cars for transporting US Army perishable supplies. The British Isles formed a useful training centre for American railway troops, most of whom were without first-hand knowledge of European railway systems. The Theatre Chief of Transportation therefore assigned various military railway units to US Army depots and to British railway installations so that the men could obtain the technical training and practical experience required for military railway operations on the continent. The United Kingdom also served as a convenient base for which to assemble and store railway rolling stock for ultimate use in France. Some of this equipment came from British sources, but most of it arrived from the United States in knockdown form. The assembly and storage of railway cars developed into a major enterprise following the cross-channel assault. On the 20th of March 1944, the 2nd Military Railway Service under Brigadier General Clarence L. Burpee arrived in England and began to prepare to take control of US military railway operations in northern France. By D-Day, detailed plans had been worked out for the transfer of US rail personnel and equipment to the continent and for the operations to be undertaken thereafter. There is a plaque at Southampton which states, "This tablet was presented to the Southern Railway by the 14th Major Port, United States Army, in proud and glorious memory of the men and women of the forces of the United Nations who sailed from this port during the Great War against aggression to secure the freedom of mankind."